Hi there, welcome to another episode of The Art of Business English. Now, today I've got a bit of a special treat for you, my listeners, because I've actually got my brother-in-law here, Jamie Henderson, who's come out from Australia on business and he's ducked over to Barcelona to just drop in and visit me. So, Jamie, welcome. Thanks for joining me on The Art of Business English.
Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So, Jamie's on a holiday. I'm working still, so I thought I'd pull him into the school and get him into to share his knowledge with us about some interesting tips on how to prepare for a meeting. So that's basically what is the premise of today's episode. We're going to be looking at how you can effectively prepare for an external meeting. So an external meeting meaning not internally with your colleagues, externally meaning with maybe a client or a customer or someone that's important to your organization. So Jamie's got a lot of experience working in business in both the private sector and the public sector. And today he's going to be sharing his knowledge with us. So Jamie, let's start then by getting a little bit of background on you and who you are and why you're so knowledgeable on this topic.
So I started in my education. I did a degree in agricultural economics in Queensland in Australia, and following that, I worked in the Department of Agriculture for the Government of Western Australia. And in that role, I had a large range of different roles to do with policy development, change management, economics, so a number of different diverse roles. And I worked for the Western Australian public sector or public service for about 20 years in total, but I did many different jobs in that time, including working in London for the trade office, the West Australian Trade Office in London, doing sort of trade and investment development for Western Australia.
Back in the days when I lived in London.
Good times. Following that, I worked for one of a minister in the government of Western Australia, and with that minister, I covered many different portfolios, which are like sectors, so including agriculture, housing, prisons, regional development, and of course agriculture, and training. So a lot of different exposure to different parts of government. And how different parts of the Western Australian economy works. So a sort of diverse range of sectors.
Okay. Yeah. And from there?
And from there, I went and worked as a consultant for a short time, offering advice on how to work with government for companies, so helping them to understand the best way to work with government. And currently I work for an oil and gas company offering the same, helping them with how to work with government and how to get efficient approvals from government. Okay,
so the whole approval process along the way. All right, so it's many years of experience.
Yeah, and I guess coming to today's topic, all of those roles involved a significant number of meetings with people from different levels. So there could be someone who is the Prime Minister of Australia or the Premier of Western Australia, or someone who is from a company, people who work in the public service, or people who are members of Parliament. So lots of different people and lots of different types of meetings.
Okay, so you've got lots of experience on the good and the bad.
Yes, hopefully.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, generally, in your experience, meetings are good, productive, or they're ineffective and a waste of time?
I think they can be productive, but it's all about how well you prepare and the time you take to think through what you want out of the meeting and what the other person that you're meeting with wants out of the meeting. Yeah. I think where I've seen, where I've felt that I've got poor outcomes from a meeting, or someone else, or perhaps it hasn't been valuable for the person I've met with, is when one party has not had time to prepare and had to rush to the meeting.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the biggest challenges I think that we face nowadays with the way the world or the way society works. We're constantly under pressure to get things done, and sometimes I feel that doesn't allow us, or we don't have the time to prepare effectively for meetings. So therefore, those outcomes are not really clear, and there's not really much structure. So let's look at structure. Yep. I mean, how what are the steps? How should we structure? What steps should we go through if we are planning to meet, I don't know, an external party or as an external key stakeholder
who's important?
Yeah, to the organisation. I mean, obviously, internal meetings you can run them. You've got your colleagues, you've got your minutes. Maybe they're informal, they're less formal because you meet on a weekly basis. But the focus today is really to look at external meetings. So preparing for, we would say important meetings. No, we would classify them
Yes.
as important to our organisation, and so maybe the outcomes we want for our business.
Yep.
Okay, so what steps should we consider or go through when we are planning?
So I think to me there's a number of key steps, which is spending time planning and for your meeting.
Planning and how much time does it take?
Well, I think it varies depending on the complexity of the meeting and the subject matter and how long the meeting's going to be. So some key things to do is to understand who you're meeting with and get some background on them. What are the current things that they're focused on? If they're a member of government, what other things are happening around them that might influence where they're at in their thinking. Have they talked, or do you know what their views are about what you're going to talk to them about?
So what they already know.
Yes.
Try and get an understanding of what they already know about the topic, and maybe also what their expectations are for the meeting.
Yep.
What the outcomes they expect.
Yes, and thinking through who is from their side who is going to come to the meeting, and thinking carefully about who you want to take from your company to the meeting. Okay. And things to reflect on are like the number of people they're bringing, the seniority of the people, and the expertise of the people. And you need to think about the same in your company about who are the most effective people to bring to the meeting.
Okay. So what's quite interesting is that many of these skill sets are transferable to other areas of business. For example, when you're delivering a presentation, we should also consider these types of things, like who are we presenting to? What do they know already? What are they coming to learn? What are their expectations for this presentation? And also, this is a bit like marketing, like who are your target audience? Who are the people that you're trying to sell to? So it's really important then to know who is going to be at the meeting and what they need to know.
And what are their interests and expectations.
Yeah, what's in it for them, right?
And I think this is often people think of a meeting as very one-sided, but the reason that you're meeting is that you both have things that you want to achieve. And so it's very important in your preparation to think about what the other person wants to achieve by meeting with you, because the best way to develop a relationship that will allow you to have an ongoing relationship and that can achieve things that benefit both of you is by understanding each other and what are your motivations.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I mean, with all relationships, if you understand the needs of the other party, then it's going to be a much more effective relationship. And that takes time to think about it. You need to sit down and think about that. And
ineffective meetings I've seen is where people come in and they want one thing from you.
Yeah, they've got their
agenda. They ask for it. And when you have a different view, they're completely lost as to what they're going to do.
Okay.
Because they haven't thought through different scenarios about what might happen.
Okay, excellent. So you need to really be thinking not just about what you want, but about what you would do based on their possible reactions to things.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think a key part of the planning is to work out the outcomes you want from the meeting, and perhaps what outcomes the other person you're meeting with might be thinking of as well.
Is it important to first identify your outcomes or your desired outcomes and then try and reflect on theirs, or how does this process work?
Well, I think you have to be clear about what you want to achieve from the meeting.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you have to think through what information they might need to understand why you want to achieve those things. And then you need to reflect on how they're going to maybe react to those things and perhaps what they will be seeking.
Okay, so all right, I understand. So you're thinking that we should maybe have just something simple, like draw a line, like if this is what we want, how might they react, good and bad?
Yes.
And trying to think of both positives and negatives.
Yes. And I think once you have framed that, it's then very clear to put your sort of key messages on each of the things that you're trying to achieve. So it really gives you clarity on how you focus your messaging on what things you want to leave in their mind when you finish the meeting.
So the word you've used here is key messaging. So it's important. So another element of this then is to have a clear message attached to each of your key outcomes.
Yes. And you really want to leave them with 3 or 4 key messages.
Yeah. So you would limit your objectives for each meeting to 3 main or 4 main outcomes.
Yes.
Yeah. More than that, it's going to be lost.
I think the other thing that's important to reflect on is the style of the meeting. So in your planning, you need to think through how the meeting will run. Are you going to give a presentation? Yeah. Is it going to be a conversational meeting? Yeah. Are they going to give a presentation? So all of those things will help you in your planning. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important not to assume that you always need to give a presentation, or that that you don't give a presentation. I think there are many different meetings, and it depends on how much information you're trying to articulate, mm-hmm. and whether it's to brief someone on a subject or whether it's to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's understanding what style of meeting it will be. Like, am I trying to convince someone of something? Am I just informing someone? Am I seeking some form of collaboration with them? I mean, if you have that clear, that's also going to help. And it's particularly with business English, if you understand the style, so if it's I'm trying to convince someone, then you maybe will use more like negotiation style language. If you are just informing someone, then you're going to try and make your message very clear and really engaging so that people remember the key information. So it's important to understand the style of meeting that you're going to be going into, because that will also have an impact on the type of language that you would like to use or that you could possibly use.
And I think that depending on where your relationship is with the person you're meeting with, that sets the formality of the meeting.
Well, that goes back to understanding who you're meeting with.
Exactly.
So that's the key foundation is really to understand who and really thinking about who's going to be there, what they know, what their expectations are. And then, you can use like more formal language, or you can dress less formally. I don't know. Yeah. You can have a roundtable discussion, or you can have someone leading with a presentation. These are the mechanics.
Yes.
So you're thinking in your mind, how will this? It's like when you're designing a website. What's the journey the person's going to take when they click on here? What's going to happen next, and here and that. So a bit like the mechanics.
And when you're meeting with government, they might walk out the door and have 5 more meetings in that day. Uh-huh. How is your messaging the one that they remember? So when they're thinking through, they've got a few key points that they've taken away and they will remember. Okay. If you leave them with too much information, they will forget. They might remember something, but they might remember the wrong thing.
Okay, so you need to be very, very clear about your objectives and your key messaging.
Yes. Okay,
so are there any ways that are there any ideas that you could give us for messaging?
I think it's be brief and to the point, and use simple language, I think is important.
I like that you said that, because I think some of our listeners, because they're not native speakers of English, they think I've got to learn all of this fantastic, a massive array of, phrasal verbs, collocations and more advanced vocabulary. It's nice to be articulate, I must admit, but at the same time, it's great to be very clear and simple and just speak in short sentences that are very concise and make sure that the message is clear, because if there are any doubts with certain expressions or vocabulary or concepts, then that really can have a negative impact on the message that you'll transmit to people. And then maybe they're thinking more about trying to understand one of the concepts instead of the whole global or the overall message that you're trying to transmit to them. Okay, so planning is important.
Yes.
Understanding our audience is important. Understanding who we're going to take to the meeting. Having very clear our objectives is important. Attaching very clear messages to that is important. Keeping those points or outcomes to 3 or 4 and being brief and succinct in our message. Yes. Okay, we've planned. What should we do next then?
I guess is preparing, which is working up your presentation, your key messages, your outcomes, and sharing them with the team, and having a pre-meeting to chat through how the meeting will operate.
So everyone's on the same page.
So everyone's on the same page.
John, you're going to lead with this. Then I'm going to hand over to you.
Yes, and you know, it does depend on the formality of the meeting. You might not need to have a pre-meeting, depending on the meeting and the relationship you have with the person. But if we're talking about a serious external stakeholder that you are engaging with, this would be the perfect process. But each circumstance is slightly different. So I think you need to have a pre-meeting, make sure everyone is clear on what your messaging is, who's going to talk about what, and then you need to think about the appropriate dress.
So dress meaning what you're going to wear.
Clothes. Thinking about what the other person might wear and wearing something that respectfully balances what they would be wearing.
And I think that's very important. Some people sometimes have it. I mean, it depends on where you work, but sometimes people have a tendency to be a little bit too informal, maybe with their clothes.
I think so,
yeah.
and I think people justify being less formal. But I think if you're meeting with government, you need to be formal. You need to think. In fact, being slightly more formally dressed is better than informally dressed.
Yeah, because I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but dressing appropriately, it projects respect for the situation and I guess the authority or the level or the seniority of that person. So if you don't dress appropriately, it can be seen as like a bit disrespectful even, or it's like you're not taking this meeting as seriously as it should.
It shows that you value their time. Yeah. And I think the other critical thing for me is be on time or be early.
Yeah, yes.
Because that demonstrates to them that you really value their time and that they're making the effort to come and meet with you, or you're going to meet with them.
I mean, in Australia, we're very punctual.
Yes.
But I don't know about Spain. My experience here is that punctuality doesn't have the same meaning. I mean, people here arrive late sometimes. They arrive late. They've got their phone in their hand. I mean, these types of things don't really transmit respect. So it's really important that you don't come with your hands full, you're checking WhatsApps or emails and you look like you're disorganized. You come, you're there in person and you're in front of the person, you're engaging them, you're not doing two things at the same time. I think that's really important. Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of moving on in our conversation to talking about the meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
So which is good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of the meeting, be on time.
Yeah.
Don't be rushed to get there because that comes across in the way that you look in the meeting.
And it's also you also feel nervous.
You feel rushed, and so turn up early. Yeah. If there's a cafe nearby, go and have a water or a coffee. Yeah. Prepare yourself and be relaxed and clear in what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Okay.
I think when you get in the meeting, introducing everyone in the team, that whoever is leading the conversation needs to introduce everybody.
So so you've worked out who's leading the meeting in the pre-meeting. You've worked out the role that each person has. When you introduce people, I mean, I think is their job title important? I mean, or how would you give us an example of how you'd introduce someone?
I think it's important to put context on why each person's in the room.
Okay, great.
And I think you can set expectations about what each person might bring to the meeting. Mm-hmm. So here is my technical expert. They will help me on the specific, if you have any specific technical questions.
Yeah, and here is Maria. She's from
the finance department. If you have some questions detailed around finance, that I'll ask Maria to help. Yeah. So I think giving some context to the people in the meeting really helps. Otherwise, it's kind of a blank wall of faces that they don't quite understand.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I found important in meeting with ministers and government officials is asking them what level of knowledge they have of the subject that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Because if you're talking about one project, they might have lots of knowledge on the project or little amount of knowledge on the project. In your head, you have all the knowledge. Yeah. So you don't want to spend the whole meeting giving them information they already know. Or no information and they're sitting there lost. Yeah. So asking some simple questions at the start of the meeting about how much do you know about the project? Would you like us to give you some background? Is really important to framing the point at which you start the conversation.
Okay, and it helps them feel a bit more comfortable too, maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess if possible, you could also try and establish this information prior to the meeting. That would be even more helpful. But sometimes it's not really easy.
Yeah, and I think it's respectful to ask even, when I've been to meetings with ministers, that they have a briefing paper that they have read, but they might not have had time to read it, or it might not have all the critical information. So giving them the opportunity to ask you is really important, I think.
Okay, great. Do you have any tips for dealing with nerves? I mean, maybe you've been to lots of meetings, but this is a potentially massive client for you, or it's a massive project or a big deal that could earn the company a considerable amount of money. Is there any way you deal with nerves before a meeting?
Well, I think the key is the planning.
Yeah.
I think if you've done effective planning and you know what you would like to get out of the meeting and you understand their motivations. Yes, it can be a bit nerve-wracking, but I think you're not expecting many surprises.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think the better you plan, the less likely you are to feel nervous.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so arrive on time, dress appropriately, respect people's time. Introduce your team. Give with some context about why they're at the meeting, and then quickly establish the background knowledge of the participants to make sure that they understand or if they need further information on the topic or a bit of a briefing.
Yep.
And then from there...
Well, I think then you need to say, thank you for your time. There are 3 key things that I'm here to talk about today, or 4 key things, and run through those key things at the start of the meeting.
Yeah, so it's like your introduction.
Yes.
Then the body, and then the conclusion.
Yes. So, thank you, Andrew, for your time today. I'm here to talk to you about topic 1, topic 2, topic 3.
Yeah.
And then you can use those 3 at the end to close out the conversation.
Exactly. So it's just the same, really, as writing an essay, as with many things. When you're writing an essay, you need to introduce a topic. You need to give the reader context. Then you go on in the body to talk about each one of those. And they're the same structures with a presentation. If you want to have an effective presentation, you need to lead in, tell the audience what you're going to be talking about, then talk about each of those points, and then really bring it all together into a really succinct, clear conclusion that leaves people with those 3 points very clear in their mind and what it was that you were trying to transmit or communicate to them. No?
And I think after you talk about the things that you want, asking them, what are the key things they want out of the meeting is important as well.
Excellent. Yeah.
Which I think gets to the next point, which is about active listening, really listening to the conversation. Yes, you've got your objectives and you've got your messages, but you need to make it a conversation and you need to open the conversation because otherwise it can be very one-sided. And you leave and you think you've got what you want, but you haven't actually listened to what was said to you.
Yeah, that's a big challenge.
It is a big challenge.
Most people are terrible listeners, and I've spoken about this many times on my podcast because I've been reading many books about being a better communicator. And it really, and it's even worse when you're a non-native speaker, because what you'll find is students are often trying to think about what they're going to say next while they're supposed to be listening to the person, because they're worried about okay, they're saying this, I think, so I'm going to try and anticipate and have it ready so that there's no silence. I mean, silence is fine. You can just say, you can use language like, okay, let me think about that for a second, or give me a chance to consider that. But it's really important that you're not thinking about what you're going to say next while someone's talking to you, because it's really easy to miss the key ideas or that they're trying to transmit to you. And people also don't want to listen. Yeah. They want to talk about their thing. This is my agenda. Yeah. I want to do this. Look, it's about me. And it's really, it's a real skill to learn to listen effectively. Have you got any ideas on how to be a more effective listener?
I think you don't want to feel, just because there's a bit of a silence doesn't mean you have to speak.
Yeah.
So it is okay that there is some silence that might allow them to talk. And I think the other thing is, which we didn't mention in the planning, is determining who's going to take the notes from the meeting. So that the person leading the meeting is able to listen and be in the conversation and not worry about capturing perhaps the notes from the meeting. Yeah. So having someone that's their job, they might not have a speaking role, but they're capturing the notes.
Yeah, okay. Do you recommend recording a meeting?
I think no. I think that generally is too confrontational for people. I think, I think it is respectful that the conversation is between the two of you.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, it needs some minute taking, and yeah, so listening. The person that's leading the meeting should be listening and attentive the whole time, not thinking about what you're going to say next, and actually listening to understand. Trying to set, even though you've got your own agenda and your own objectives, setting those aside for 1 second while the person's talking, so that you really understand where they're coming from or what their position is really important. And it's okay to have this silence, and it shows that you're actually listening and deliberating or thinking over these points. I've heard a wonderful expression, and it is, people will only start listening when you stop talking, because people actually need some time to really assimilate that information and mull over it in their minds. So it's important that you are comfortable with a bit of silence, and that you don't just speak non-stop the whole time and very quickly and nervously, and then you pass it to your colleague, and you don't give the other party time to offer you their opinion or reflect on some of the things that you've said. If you talk constantly, it's very difficult for them to remember the original point that you were bringing up. So maybe they wanted to reflect or ask you a question about something that you said at the beginning of the discourse, but you've moved so far forward that it's very difficult for them to go back and clarify things. So yeah, keeping the pace as well is important. What else?
Now, I think the hardest part of meetings, the hardest part is that you have to use your emotional intelligence to analyse the meeting as it progresses.
Okay, excellent.
And you might have to change what you are seeking from the meeting during the meeting.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah.
You might find that the person you're meeting with is not ready to think about what you want.
Okay.
They don't have enough information. They don't understand. They give you a new piece of information that changes what you might want to do. So I think you have to be thinking what you're hearing as you're going, and you might soften what you're trying to achieve because of what you're hearing, but that might become an action for what you do next.
Okay, so it's really being there, present in the moment.
So you might be there thinking, well, we want to reach agreement on this. But then when you get to the meeting, you realise that you're not going to do that today.
Yeah.
So really your actions become then thinking about, what's the next engagement? What do I need to provide them? How do I help them to understand or to reach a point where we can reach agreement?
Excellent. Okay, good. So being flexible.
Yes, and understanding what is happening in the conversation.
I mean, emotional intelligence is something that's becoming spoken about more and more.
Yeah.
More and more emphasis is being put on it. It's something that's not as easy to quantify or understand, but it's incredibly important. And I think, I was watching a TED talk the other day. It was really interesting what we can learn from the younger generations, what the younger generations can learn from us. And a lot of even though maybe the older generation is becoming less relevant in terms of some technological aspects of business, their emotional intelligence, which the experience that you gain over many, many years of working with people, is something that you can offer the younger generations who maybe are a bit more analytical or clinical and less, they lack this experience with human-to-human contact. So it was quite an interesting TED talk. I'll put it into the show notes. So yeah, using your emotional intelligence during the meeting, thinking on your feet, but actually listening to what is being told to you, so that you can maybe adjust your outcomes or expectations.
And I think if you're not a native English speaker, that is a very challenging aspect. Because you've got the challenge of trying to think, and the subtleties of the language you might use are more difficult to come up with in the short term.
Yeah. So again, slowing it down and listening is going to do a lot of good for you.
I think the other bit that is important is making sure that you run the meeting so that it fits within the time.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you have half an hour, make sure it's what you can achieve in half an hour.
Yeah. So that's having expectations very clear again.
Very clear.
And I think respecting time is important too. I'm sure most of you have been in meetings that have just gone on forever, and the outcomes are very unclear.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think in closing the meeting, I think important to reiterate the things that you were there to talk about, and I think discuss the actions out of the meeting, and talk to agree on what the actions following. Thank you for the meeting today. My understanding is that you're going to do this and I'm going to do this.
So having clear what the next step is.
What the next steps are, and who might be doing which bit is really important.
Yeah, and when, by when.
By when.
Yeah.
And also, is there anything else that you want to discuss or anything else that you think we've missed? I think is really important.
Okay, so, the conclusion is very important. You need to bring it all together. You need to have the messaging and you need to revisit or summarize those 3 or 4 main points. And the expectations for the next actions are very important. Yes. Who's doing what? When are they going to do it by? And when are we going to meet next? Or when should I expect to get this from you?
Yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned follow-up now as well?
Yeah, so I think when you leave the meeting, I think if it's a bigger team and it's a very important meeting, then having a brief discussion about the meeting.
So a post-op, sort of like post-meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
So for a very significant meeting, you would have a pre-meeting to prepare and a post-meeting to discuss what happened. So depending, this is a serious meeting, so you would do that. I think then the minute taker needs to, or note taker needs to document what happened in the meeting, who was there, and what the actions are.
Yeah, and just evaluate if it was effective.
Yeah. Now, how formal or informal that is depends on what the meeting was and what your company requires. So it might just be an email with dot points to your team members with the actions and who's going to do what. But I think capturing it to make sure you get value out of your time, you've got to make sure you get value out of your time.
Yeah, feedback's important.
Yeah.
Every time you do some form of coaching, it's really important, this debrief at the end, because that's where people really learn or get this perspective on if what they did or how they performed was effective or not. And you can discuss what you think maybe you could do better next time, or what you think you did effectively this time, and then maybe get a feel for what the other participants felt was, if the other party were happy, if you thought if it was a success, maybe because you were focused so much on leading the meeting, you missed some emotional intelligence aspects. Maybe in your team you've got people who are native who could help the non-native speakers understand some of the intricacies of the meeting that was lost on them. Maybe the minute taker has got all the points and maybe you've forgotten some, so that can help you refresh what was spoken about.
And every meeting is about building a relationship. So therefore you want the relationship to become more positive with each meeting. So therefore a critical part is going back and saying thank you for the time, thank you for the meeting.
So this is not related to your
internal?
This is not related to your internal, it's related to
external. The person you met with, a quick email perhaps, or a phone call, and say, look, thank you for your time. It was a really valuable meeting. Just confirming that we agreed that I'm going to do this, we're going to do this, you might be doing that.
Yeah. We're going to send you the information that you required.
Send you the information it required, or sometimes it could just be thank you for the meeting, it was great. Did you have any follow-up questions? It shows a real respect in the relationship, and it shows that you really value the time that they put into your company and you.
Yeah, and I think that's really something simple that it's so easy to do and it doesn't take much time, but it's something that can be so easily overlooked.
We're all busy. And so you get on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and you forget that little gesture is a big gesture.
Okay, excellent, nice. Yeah. Okay, great. So we've brought the meeting to the close. We've had a post meeting internally with our team, if necessary, just to reflect on how the meeting went, so make sure everyone understands what their next step is, or what they should do. Or what their action is, or their task from that meeting. And then we've if we think it's necessary, which in most cases it is, we should thank the external party for coming. And that's what else?
Well, I think that the other key point is we've described a very comprehensive approach to a meeting.
Yes.
Now, we all have limited resources, so you need to think carefully about the level of resources you apply to the meeting. Because I think if you did that structure for every meeting, that's the perfect preparation for a large meeting that's very important to you. But I think there are ways to do all of those elements in simpler ways with smaller team or one person, if I'm having an informal meeting with someone, maybe over coffee, I might spend 5 minutes writing some dot points of what outcomes I want for the meeting prior to the meeting, and that is all that I do.
Yeah.
And maybe an email after to say thank you. Yeah. So I think it's framing the resources that you apply appropriately to the importance of the meeting, where your relationship is at.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's pretty comprehensive, and I feel pretty clear. Good. I mean, we haven't really covered anything related to specific language for meetings. However, I think it's just important sometimes that we get perspective on how to plan meetings, because we go to a lot of meetings, and I think a lot of us go into meetings very disorganized. We don't plan at all. We just say, I've got a meeting on Monday. I'll just walk in there, morning, have your coffee, and then you spend 2 hours, and at the end of the meeting, it's like, what have I got out of this 2 hours?
I mean, in terms of language, simple language, brief messages, don't use acronyms.
Yeah, they can be really dangerous.
Or if you use acronyms, make sure people understand them before they use them.
Yeah.
And don't give them lots and lots of information. Okay. People don't remember.
No, and we don't want
to. And people, if you have a government official might have 5-7 meetings in a day. Yeah. How are they going to remember all the information?
And when are they going to have the time to go through all of your stuff? I mean, you remember, for you, it's very important.
And you create the opportunity by building a relationship for them to come and ask you if they need further information or clarification. So you don't have to give them every piece of information in the meeting.
But we have to remember that, because we think, it's very important to me. Yeah. It's very important to me, and I want to make sure they've got all the information. But a lot of information means a lot of work too. I mean, for people. And busy people don't need to be given extra work.
Yeah. I mean, a meeting is about relationships and sharing outcomes that you might be able to achieve.
Okay, excellent. Well, if you guys have any further questions, if you wanted to comment on this, then please feel free to drop us a comment over at the website, The Art of Business English. We're putting this interview up there, as well as on our YouTube channel. So, Jamie, I really appreciate your time. It's been excellent.
Thanks, Andrew.
Having you
pleasure.
Here. My brother, he's fantastic. He's very experienced, and it's always a pleasure having you here. It's great to have you here. This what are we in now? October. Rainy October. Yeah, you brought the rain with you. Thanks, buddy. Yeah, but it's been great having you, and thank you for your insight today. And wonderful to have you. Cheers, buddy.
Thanks,
Take care. All right, buddy. Bye. If you are interested in subscribing to The Art of Business English, then just head over to theartofbusinessenglish.com/subscribe, and you'll get a weekly email from me, and you'll be aware of all of the podcasts when they come out, as well as all the courses and anything else is coming up. Well, that's it for me then, people. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, come over to the website, subscribe, like, share it with your friends, and I'll see you all next week. Hope you're having a great week. Take care. Bye for now.